Hello everyone. This is chapter 20 from my contemporary romance novel Under a Namibian Sky. But before I continue, people have been asking me, what does it look like? So here's the novel. Can you see? There it is. Yeah, so that's the novel. Okay, so chapter 20. Thoughts of Luca dominated Naomi's mind as she walked toward the Lapa to have breakfast with him, Auntie Elsa and Kerry. She couldn't get her head around the idea that Luca was back at Desert Lodge. It wasn't a dream, as she'd thought at first, and yet. Naomi had the sense her body was doing one thing while she was somewhere else. Is this what people refer to when they talked about an out-of-body experience? It certainly felt that way. Within moments, she'd see Luca again. Her heart sped up. Images of him flitted across her mind's eye. How could she forget his gorgeous torso wet and glistening in the pool? Casually dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, she remembered his excitement as he took pictures of the desert and the animals. The night in the Lapa, when he presented the heart-wrenching video he'd edited about Ellie Naomi. Another image stirred in her mind, of him sitting across from her, his lush hair begging to be touched, his beautiful lips curled in a smile, his dark eyes penetrating her soul, his presence overwhelming her senses. As she came around the corner, there he was, dazzling, his black hair glinting blue in the sun. Dark sunglasses covered his eyes. His head was bowed over papers in his hand. Naomi stopped. She tried to convince her mind she was actually seeing him. He was here. Her heart was pounding so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. Luca looked up then, as though he'd heard her thoughts. He removed his sunglasses slowly, his eyes moving over her face and body as he did so. The action was so sensual that a tiny gasp escaped Naomi's lips. She couldn't control the huge smile that burst from her heart any longer. Luca's face lit up with joy. Pushing the chair away, he took long strides toward her, his arms opened wide. Their hug couldn't get them close enough to each other. His body felt hard, comforting and deeply sensual against hers. Auntie Elsa walked past them toward the table Luca had just left, grinning at the couple clinging to each other. Kerry winked at them as she followed Auntie Elsa moments later, a massive smile on her face. "Shouldn't you guys be doing that in private?" Luca's low, happy laugh rumbled into Naomi's chest, where their bodies were still connected. His lips felt soft, warm and gentle where he kissed her forehead. Then, taking her hand in his, he kissed her fingers as he led her toward the table to sit beside him. He leaned into her, his smile friendly, his eyes warm. She'd forgotten how beautifully mellifluous his voice was. "You look so much better, amore. How are you feeling?" Naomi's voice wouldn't work. She tried to get the words out, but they stayed stuck in her throat. She gave him a thumbs up instead, her mouth unwilling to relinquish the smile that wanted to live there permanently. She was so happy to see him. All her doubts and fears disappeared like the early morning fog over the desert's dunes. It was the best breakfast she'd enjoyed since he'd left. Kerry turned out to be a far stricter boss than Auntie Elsa ever was. She adamantly refused to allow Naomi to take any guests, including Luca, into the desert until she'd recovered entirely from her ordeal with Stefan. What was even more frustrating was that Luca sided with Kerry on this issue. He was supposed to be on her side, wasn't he? As far as Naomi was concerned, even though her sore wrist was still a bother, it was nothing she couldn't handle, having dealt with many sprained ankles and wrists throughout her life. Naomi was as willful as Kerry. But when her protestations fell on deaf ears, Naomi made the best of a bad situation. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a vacation. Now was as good a time as any to take one. But how would she do that with Luca back at the lodge? She wasn't entirely sure why he'd returned. She assumed it had something to do with the desert buggies. But there were no sign of them, and he hadn't explained himself. He was kind and courteous, yet their former easy banter and intimacy, for the most part, was gone. But despite the shy awkwardness that had taken its place, each morning they'd swim together. Auntie Elsa and Kerry would join them for breakfast, after which Luca would excuse himself to get back to work. He spent much of his time working in his room, the same one he'd previously occupied. Apparently, according to Kerry, it felt like home from home to him. He only reappeared again for lunch, groggy from concentrating in a world Naomi had never experienced. After a few days, she was getting increasingly more bored. What began as a gift of time in which to swim and read as much as she'd wanted had now become tedium. What made it worse was that everyone else seemed inordinately busy. For most of the day, Luca was working in his room, a large area of which he'd turned into an office. Kerry had her hands full being the new manager and handling everything that entailed. Auntie Elsa was busy with Kerry or Chef, or she mysteriously disappeared from the lodge for long hours at a time, giving no explanation afterward. But everyone knew it had to have something to do with the birthday party she was planning with Santina. There was only so much moping about the lodge Naomi could do before the desert called. The dunes beckoned like sirens. She could no longer ignore their ancient primitive song. But even though she didn't want to admit it, the fear of bumping into Stefan somewhere in the desert, should he still be in Namibia, made leaving the immediate area deeply unappealing. She couldn't shrug off the feeling that he might lie in wait for her, as a predator did its prey. But should he be hiding in the desert, surely he wouldn't be stupid enough to venture too close to the lodge, would he? Naomi discovered quickly that Luca suddenly appeared if she moved too far away from the lodge for his liking. How he knew she'd walked through the gate that would take her into the near desert within sight of the lodge was beyond her. Did the man harbour some secret psychic ability? No sooner had she walked but a half a mile into the desert than she could hear him calling her name. She'd stop, smile, and watched as he took long strides toward her. Grinning, sunglasses shielding his eyes, he'd take her hand and walk with her to the first big dunes. Gratitude swelled in her heart that he understood how much her soul yearned for the unfathomable quietness. It was the desert's unique song that always revitalized her soul. Luca didn't make conversation, but his presence was more comforting than she'd wanted to admit at first. Together they'd sit against a dune, allowing the beauty of the wilderness to mesmerize them. When Johan discovered Luca was back at Desert Lodge, he sent an invitation and truck one morning for them to visit the orphanage. Naomi was so much stronger and more confident than the last time they'd seen her. Her excited greeting filled both Luca and Naomi with joy. This time they could help with the orphans' breakfast feed, though Luca focused more on taking pictures of Naomi feeding them. It was heartbreaking to think all 14 of these gorgeous little Ellies were orphans because the ivory from their mother's tusks was so precious. But that time as a great healer was apparent in the antics of the boisterous bunch. Once they'd had their breakfast, their surrogate fathers took them for a long walk deep into the desert. As they walked away in single file, each Ellie holding on to the tail of the one in front, silence descended on the orphanage. Only Naomi remained. She was too young yet to join the rest of the herd. Luca took more photos and videos of her. By the end of the week, Naomi was desperate to return to work. She couldn't stand being idle any longer. Marching to Kerry's office, she was determined to get her way this time. Without knocking, she opened the door, ready to confront her friend. She found Kerry sitting with her back to the door, facing Luca, sitting opposite her. They were evidently in the middle of a meeting. Luca had been reading from a paper in his hand, but when he heard the door open, looked up and saw Naomi standing there. The pupils of his eyes dilated, and a stunning smile appeared instantly on his face. Embarrassment colouring her cheeks, Naomi dashed backward, her good arm waving behind her to find the doorknob again. "Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting. Hello, Luca. I didn't realise you guys were in a meeting. I'll come back later, Kerry." She felt even more foolish for stumbling so awkwardly over her words. Kerry turned her chair to the side so she had both Naomi and Luca in view. "Don't go yet, Naomi. Luca and I have nearly finished, and I think it's time for you guys to chat. Luca had some interesting questions about aspects of the dune buggies that I couldn't answer, but I know you'd be able to give him all the information he needs." Naomi felt her face flush. Damn. She'd chosen the wrong time to confront Kerry. She moved to the other side of Kerry's desk to sit beside Luca so she didn't have to look at him. Perhaps that way she could keep her mind on business and stay professional. Though Kerry's office was large by any standards, it felt too enclosed for Naomi's liking. Being in such close quarters to Luca made Naomi nervous. It was one thing to be out in the open desert with him, or in the pool where she could swim away. But here, there was no escape. If she messed up now, it could damage their deal about the buggies, and she wouldn't be held responsible for that. No, there was no way out. She had known this moment would come, of course, but she was unprepared for it now it was here. She'd always imagined they'd be communicating via Skype. Luca would be in Italy and she'd be here, safe. But perhaps it was just as well it was happening this way. If she'd known beforehand that she'd be talking business to him today, she'd have had time to panic about it. Just the thought of it made her breathe higher and faster in her body, and her palms became instantly sweaty. No, perhaps this was the best way after all. She was determined to stay competent and to have an effective and productive meeting with Luca about the buggies. She'd focus on the issue. She wasn't listening to Kerry and Luca's conversation. Instead, she tried to signal for Kerry to stay, but annoyingly, Kerry seemed not to understand what Naomi meant. Instead, Kerry got up and smiled sweetly at Luca. "Thank you for your time, Luca." She winked at Naomi before closing the door behind her. "He's all yours. I'll see you guys later." Luca's nearness in such a confined space reminded Naomi of their time in the jet. And look what happened then. She pulled her chair away from him so there was more comfortable space between them. Naomi felt self-conscious suddenly. She was aware of the bruise on her face and that Luca was looking too directly at her. Her hand involuntarily went to her cheek as though she was seeking reassurance that the swelling remained hidden. But her disobedient eyes wouldn't leave his face. Luca waited. But when it became clear Naomi wouldn't say anything, he shrugged slightly and cleared his throat. "Well, to business then, I guess." Luca asked questions she could easily answer. Naomi felt herself relax. Luca was still a stranger to her now, albeit friendlier than when he'd left, but a stranger. At least he wasn't quite the Iceman anymore. It was still difficult to believe that this dazzling man had held her in his arms and kissed her. She felt as though she'd been embraced by a dream that wouldn't let her go. The feeling was vaguely disturbing. It lived at the edge of her mind, half-formed. It wasn't the first time she thought of him as her dream man. She sighed. Immediately concern showed in Luca's eyes as he leaned forward in his chair, placing a warm hand on her forearm. "Are you all right? Have we tired you out?" She knew she had to answer, but all her attention was on the heat from his hand on her arm. "Oh, no, I'm okay, thank you." "Good." Luca squinted as though he didn't quite believe her, but sat back in his chair again. He asked more questions about the desert conditions the buggies were most likely to meet on a day-to-day basis, and seemed satisfied with the information she gave him. Right, I think that's all for now. If I need more information, we'll need another meeting. She couldn't be sure, but the way he said it, she almost believed he was flirting with her again. Luca lifted the laptop on which he'd been taking notes from his lap onto Kerry's desk. He'd used a gorgeous picky of Ellie Naomi as his screensaver. Naomi hadn't expected it. It reminded her of the gift he'd left in her room. By the way, thank you for the painting. I don't think I've thanked you for it yet. Luca's eyes seemed to communicate something beyond his words. But perhaps she just imagined it. Do you like it? Yes, it's absolutely beautiful, thank you. But why did you give it to me? Why didn't you take it with you? Why do you think, amore? Once again, she couldn't think of anything to say. But before she could respond, Kerry opened the door. Oops! I didn't realize you guys were still in here. Luca got up, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We've just finished. Please feel free to take back your office. His dark eyes returned to Naomi's. Once again, she had the distinct impression there was more going on behind them than she could see. It was intriguing and annoying in equal measure. Did he just wink at her? I'll see you later. Naomi nodded. Luca picked up his laptop. Without a backward glance, waving at them with the back of his hand, he walked through the door. Naomi continued to stare at Luca's back as he disappeared. She'd answered the buggy questions to her satisfaction and his, apparently. Why, then, did she feel so upset? It was only right that Luca treated this as a business meeting, because that is what it was. But her heart had wanted something different, something she couldn't have. Not for the first time since Luca had left did Naomi feel pity for those poor waitresses who'd experienced flings with one of these wealthy princes. The difference was they got over it quickly, so it was just a fling for them. But how would she get over her love for Luca? This wasn't just a fling for her. Luca lived in her heart. He lived in her soul. No other man would ever enter those places. It wasn't a decision. It was a fact, cast in the hardest of diamonds. Yes, he was back. He was lovely toward her, and yet... Naomi wished with all her heart she could undo the soul bond thing she experienced with Luca. It caused nothing but pain. Kerry walked around the desk to place her hands on Naomi's shoulders. What's going on, hun? I know you. I can feel your pain. I know you and Luca had left on a weird note, but all relationships have their ups and downs, don't they? Hasn't it helped to have him back? Didn't your meeting just now help to make things up with him again? Kerry massaged Naomi's shoulders while she waited for her friend to respond. Naomi sighed, as much from the pain in her heart as from the release of the tension in her shoulders Kerry's hands were massaging away. I don't know what happened. But it's for the best, you know. I'm just glad we have the buggy deal. That's down to you. Kerry's hands became still for a moment. You won't fob me off so easily again, Naomi. I don't like seeing you like this. How can I help if you don't tell me what's going on? Naomi put a hand over one of Kerry's hands resting on her shoulder. I'm not fobbing you off. I genuinely don't know what happened. All I know is Luca suddenly became so cold toward me. Yes, he's back, but he's here for the buggies, isn't he? He hasn't said anything to me or explained his sudden change toward me, and it makes me think it was just a vacation fling for him. We've seen so many of those here, haven't we? Kerry grabbed a chair and sat down facing Naomi. I can't believe you'd think what you and Luca had was just a vacation fling. Are you serious? He flew you in his jet to dinner in Windhoek. Who does that with a fling? Naomi couldn't help smiling at the look of outrage on Kerry's face. I know what you're saying, but we're talking about Luca. That's just his style. I don't think he thought it was a big deal at all. I'm sure he does stuff like that all the time. And now he's back, he's different. Kerry frowned. But what about the painting? It's stunning. If you were nothing to him, why would he leave it a painting like that to you? One he'd put his energy into. Naomi didn't want to share her fears with Kerry, but she knew Kerry wouldn't let it go, not now they'd started to talk about it. I don't know why he gave me the painting. I asked him, but he didn't reply. If he took it back to Italy, it would only remind him of me, and perhaps he didn't want that reminder. I don't know. Kerry continued as though she hadn't heard Naomi's last comment. And when he arrived that night, and you were still so out of it, he immediately went to you. Don't you remember how he held you? And the morning after, he hugged you so tightly, I wondered if it was decent to do in public. Naomi got up. She could feel herself getting upset now she was talking about Luca. She felt even more confused. To be honest, I don't want to think about it, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. Kerry said it in such a way Naomi knew Kerry wouldn't rest until she understood it. Naomi sighed and slumped back into the chair. Look, Luca is who he is, and I am who I am. We don't belong in each other's worlds. I'll get over him. It's just that I haven't allowed myself to feel this way about a guy. Ever before. That's all. Kerry contemplated her friend. Stop it! What? Saying like that. Kerry sat back in her chair. Okay, look. You're more than just my best friend. You're the sister I've always wanted. I won't sit by and watch you suffer like this. Like I said, I can feel your pain. I also know you better than you know yourself. What are you trying to hide? What are you running away from? It was true. Kerry knew her like no one else ever did. Naomi remembered all the nights they'd spent sitting under the stars in the desert, talking their hearts out, sharing their secrets with each other. Kerry knew of Naomi's indelible fear that death would claim those people she loved deeply, as it had with her parents. She knew eventually Kerry would put two and two together and come up with the answer Naomi was trying so hard to deny, even to herself. Kerry seemed not to notice Naomi's hesitation. And don't deny it, under normal circumstances, you would have had it out with Luca by now. But you haven't even asked him about what this is all about, have you? Naomi shook her head, and Kerry continued. See? I knew it. I knew there's something about Luca you're running away from. A light bulb suddenly went on in Kerry's eyes. Oh my God! You're petrified, isn't that it? You love him so much you're terrified to lose him, like you lost your parents. That's why you haven't talked to him about what has happened between you. Oh, Naomi, hon! Kerry kneeled down in front of her friend, her arms in a tight embrace around Naomi's torso, as intense, unrestrained sobs tore from the very depths of Naomi's soul. Thank you so much for listening, for watching, for sharing and liking my videos, and most of all, thank you for subscribing to my YouTube channel. If you click the icon, the bell icon, you'll be notified when the next video goes live. Until next time.